Well, hello, friends. It's wonderful to have you all joining this conversation on white supremacy and racism, taking responsibility. We are co-hosted by the Northern Texas, Northern Louisiana Synod of the ELCA, by the public witness team of the NT-NL Synod, and Briarwood Leadership Center, which is a ministry of NT-NL. So we're having this conversation in Northern Texas, but of course it's a conversation that extends far and wide in its relevance to our life together in the church. And so wonderful to have all of you here as we continue on in this work. I'm sure that many of you recognize that the reading we did for this evening from Enrique Dussel is not the easiest reading. We've been, kind of ramping up in the intensity, the academic intensity of the reading that we're doing. But also, I hope that you recognize the importance of the ideas that we are encountering together so that we can better inform ourselves as we move forward toward the discernment of what action we must take together in Northern Texas to address the related challenges of white supremacy and racism. And so, Emma, I think you've got an introductory thought for us this evening.
All right. Well, good evening, all. We're so glad to have you here. And Medrick, my husband, said, "Oh, this is a hard reading." I said, "No, it's nothing. He's just talking about racism, sexism, all of these things that we talk about, but only it's in Argentina." And I must say, the Lutheran Church introduced me to Black theology of liberation by James Cone. All right. Even though I was a bookseller, but I didn't become familiar with James Cone as a bookseller. I became affiliated with him. I knew about him through the Lutheran Church. And so he has liberation theology. So he started like about 69. Well, Dussel, who we're reading tonight, we're reading tonight, started in 1970. So we have this wave across the world, actually, about liberation theology. And I want to share, for example, there's a priest, I want to share this letter that the priest wrote, Father, of course, okay, he wrote Father Julian Zinni, and he was a member of the movement of priests for the Third World, founded after the Second Vatican Council by a group of priests who had strong political and social participation. Between 1967 and 76, the movement worked as an Argentine version of the liberation theology. So, all over the world, people are dealing with liberation theology. Here in the States, we know about James Cone. But, and so Dussel, is that right? Dussel? Okay, well,
Dussel, yeah.
Enrique Dussel talks about this, and I know when you read it, his grandfather came to this country. His great-grandfather came to Argentina as a carpenter looking for work. And so, and he was Lutheran, by the way. So anyway, but he talks about the myth. And that's what we're dealing with, the myth that the Europeans brought. But I want to share with you something you may be able to relate to. If you ever read Ernest J. Gaines, he's one of my favorite poets. He was born in Louisiana on a plantation. And he wrote this book called A Lesson Before Dying. And some of you may have seen it or read it. Do you know what a myth is, Jefferson? I asked him. A myth is an old lie that people believe in. White people believe that they're better than anyone else on earth, and that's a myth. The last thing they ever want to see is a Black man stand and think and show that common humanity that is in all of us. It would destroy their myth. They would no longer have justification for having made us slave and keeping us in the condition we are in. As long as none of us stand, they're safe. They're safe with me. They're safe with Reverend Ambrose. I don't want them to feel safe with you anymore. I want you to chip away at that myth by standing. I want you, yes, you, to call them liars. I want you to show them that they are as much a man, that you are as much a man, more a man than they can ever be. That jury, you call them men. That judge, is he a man? The governor is no better. They play by the rules their forefathers created hundreds of years ago. Their forefathers said that they were only 3/5 of human, and they believe it to this day. Sheriff Guidry does too. He calls me professor, but he doesn't mean it. He calls Reverend Ambrose, but he doesn't respect him. So we're dealing with myth. And so I guess at this time we'll turn to Enrique or to Robert.
Sure. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you for that intro. And yes, we are interconnected across context, and that is part of why Santiago Slobodsky is here with us this evening. I'd like to say a few words about Professor Slobodsky. And I'm sure he's wondering what in the world I'm going to say about him. So I will first point out that Santiago and I have known each other since 2003. The first night we met together, we shared an apartment in Waco, Texas, as we were both visiting Baylor University and Professor Mark Ellis in that space. And we were kind of instant roommates, and we've been roommates several times since then. And Santiago has been to the majority of congregations I have served as a pastor, including St. John Lutheran in Coriel City, as a Latin American Marxist Jew has come to these congregational settings and has been deeply welcomed because of Santiago's wonderful way of connecting with people in whatever context he happens to be in. So Professor Slobodsky is the chair of Jewish studies at Hofstra University. I'll be more official in how I say that. He is the Florence and Robert Kaufman Endowed Chair in Jewish Studies and director of the Jewish Studies program at Hofstra University, which is located on Long Island. And he is also serving in 3 area studies programs of Latin American and Caribbean studies, Middle Eastern and Central Asian studies, and European studies. Is a global sociologist of knowledge. The person I turn to when I try to understand the history of global thought. Santiago is my go-to person. He's the person who first taught me not just about liberation theology, but liberation philosophy. Without me knowing Santiago, I would not be the thinker that I am. I would not have the same frameworks and tools that I currently possess. And so knowing Santiago and having him as a friend has been such an important thing for me and for my family. Some of my family is joining on this call tonight. I will not call them out, but they also have known Santiago for many, many years, and he is beloved as a family friend, but also deeply respected as an intellectual leader, as somebody who has global ethical commitments, and somebody who acts on those commitments. And so, Professor Slobodsky, it's a joy and an honor to welcome you here this evening.
Okay, Robert, thank you very much. First of all, thank you very much, Robert and Emma, for your words, and Jason as well, and for the organization of this. I am sure that you haven't noticed at all, but I cannot have an accent. So if at any point it's not very clear what I am saying, just let me know. And I am going to be sharing a PowerPoint that gives a little bit of a summary of what I'm going to try to talk about. But if at some point it's not clear, please in the chat or just raise your hand somehow, and I will be able to refresh myself. You know, after 5 or 6 times I refresh myself, you might get 30% of what I'm saying, and believe me, it's enough. I am not that interesting. But if there is an interesting part of me, it's because of the dialogues I have had throughout the years with my friend Robert, and now I am going to be learning from all of you. So I really appreciate you coming here in the late afternoon, early evening from Texas and around the world. And I am very, very looking forward to unpack a little bit this difficult or not difficult reading, according to Emma, of Enrique Dussel together. So let me start a little bit sharing the screen, and please confirm that all of you can see the screen. Yeah, I am going to make it bigger. Give me just 1 second. So can I confirm that everyone can see the screen? Yes, wonderful. So today we are going to be unpacking a little bit the work of Enrique Dussel to talk about coloniality, the myth of modernity, and white supremacy. So I am going to be speaking about a little bit of the work of Enrique Dussel, of the text you already have with you, and a little bit of work of Enrique Dussel that is in other texts and people who follow and learn from Enrique Dussel and has actually pushed his work forward. So let me just welcome you to the first image that you have in the right side of your screen. So when you see a map of the world and you see the quantity, the space that Europe has conquered since 1492 until today, you are going to see that actually Europe has conquered in many different ways over 3/4 of the world. The other 1/4 is either Europe or other places that has been extremely influenced by Europe, even though Europe might not have been able to conquer them. And the question I'm going to explore today with you, with the work of Enrique Dussel, is how this happened, why it happened, when it happened, what is the role of the church of what it happened, what are the consequences of this global conquest today, and how this conquest relates with racism and white supremacy. So the person we are going to be using to understand this is Enrique Dussel. Enrique Dussel, who is still alive and extremely strong and active today, majorly in politics in Mexico especially, was born in Argentina, as Emma very well said before. He got 2 PhDs, because he liked to study, one in France in philosophy, and one in Spain in colonial, especially church and colonial history. After he was persecuted because of his beliefs in Argentina in a little bit before a US-backed coup d'etat in 1970s, and his house was destroyed by a bomb. He fled Argentina, first of all, for a short stint in the US and later on to Mexico, where he settled, and eventually he became a Mexican Argentinian. And he's known for his work, not only in liberation theology, as very well Emma was talking before, but also, as Robert mentioned, on liberation theology, the church in Latin America, and the colonialism. And you can see the two of not only his face, and this is how he looks when he explains something, which is wonderful because he explained you the whole war in 2 minutes. I will take a few minutes more and I will do my best, but he's much better than I could ever be. And later on, 2 of his books. The first one is The Invention of America, that is referred in his article. And the other one is a collection of, I don't want to lie to you, but I think it's 14, 15 volumes of the church in Latin America from 1482 to 1992, which he coordinated and he edited. And the first question you are going to see in the text that actually we have read is the question is when modernity starts. And there are 2 versions of this that led to very different conclusions. One is the, I will call now a little bit old option, European-centric option, which says modernity started in the 17th, 18th century. Why? It's because Europe and later on the US have at that time industrial and political revolutions. So if we start from there, we think everything else was the medieval dark past, and the newness is this European liberalism that has revolutionized the world in industry, in politics and economics, and now Europe should illuminate the whole world. Enrique Dussel say, wait a second. Because if we think about the second option, which is that the modernity started in the 16th, 17th century, history looks very differently. It starts from the moment in which Europe constituted itself from being a very small peripheral power to a global power through genocide and usurpation of lands of natives, enslavement of Africans, and it is going to be clear. It's not that slaves were enslaved. People in Africa, human beings in Africa were taken and enslaved, and confiscation, expulsion of Jews and Muslims. This process that date for 2 centuries before the first option is going to give Europe the resources, economical, political, epistemological, which means in the way we think, to think itself as a center of the world, and the others need the help of Europe to develop. So it is not that the center was developed and needs to sell the periphery. But Enrique Dussel explains that the center was created by making everyone else a periphery. So the center is a center because everyone else is not. And I'm going to ask you to look at the second image in front of you to talk a little bit about how most of the world has been underdeveloped. So you have North America in the top, you have Europe also the top on the other side, and Africa completely depleted, and Latin America completely taking over. And I think it's very interesting that actually being presented Latin America as completely depleted and as white. So what are the lessons we get if we start modernity? Enrique Dussel will tell us from 1492. Europe and eventually North America, which is going to be a central colony and extension of Europe, will take the resources away from what they are going to call peripheries in the world. It is not that Europe and the US is rich and the majority of the world is poor, but that Europe and the US become rich by depleting the resources of the rest of the world. And they created an economical division in the construction of people as inferior, primitive, or barbarian in order to justify the conquest, expropriation, and genocide. So when these resources are being expropriated, the white Christian man, and I'm going to emphasize with man here, I will explain that a little bit, a role of gender very, very soon, considered is the only one capable of making society advance without understanding that they were taking over ideas, resources, lives from other people to make that possible. So why I call it a man? I call it a man because people who follow Enrique Dussel start to actually talk that in 1492 we are going to be in presence of 4 different genocides. The first one is a genocide against natives, especially in the Americas, but later on we extended throughout the world. The second against people who are going to start to be seen as Black or African, and I want to emphasize this part because it's very important. Neither natives, not people in Africa consider themselves natives or Blacks. They were considering themselves different people who were sometimes, they were even fighting with each other. The construction of them as a collective without more identity than the one that Europe imported on them is a European construction. The third one is on Muslims and Jews. And the last one is on women. First of all, with European witch hunt, which was happening the other way. These women were women who were having European knowledges. They were not part of the mainstream European knowledge. And this needs to be eradicated. We have it in Europe, we have it in the Americas, and we have it throughout the world, creating a superiority of European man. That also led for people who have intersecting and overlapping racializations, such as Black women, Native women, Jewish women, to actually suffer both at the same time, creating new kinds of oppression. That sometimes were reproduced by men who were also what we call today men of color. So before the ego cogito, that for Enrique Dussel is what the expression of the card is, I think, therefore I am, which means my possibility of thinking precedes who I am. He says that there is an ego conquistador. I conquer, therefore, and I am. So before Europe constituted itself as Europe, they did it by covering the difference with others or emphasizing the difference with others. And as such, Europe is constructed in distinction with another that is going to be inferiorized in multiple ways. So the question is how this ego conquistador that today sounds so violent, today sounds so, I would say, genocidal, okay, was justified. It was justified with an idea of redemptive violence. According to a Western model, there is an altruistic project to advance society for people who lack meaning for the others. And here is when the church, from the very beginning, is going to have a key role in the racialization of people. For 500 years, I explained before, over 3/4 of the world was or had been under European dominion. The distinction between the previous conquest, which have been throughout history, and this one is that not only Europe became a global power, but also justified the conquest with the idea of helping the other to develop, helping the other to save themselves. So in the 17th century, they express it with this dictum: convert to Christianity for your own good or humanity, or I will kill you. So it's a project of altruism. It's a project of helping the other by saying, you should want to become like me, or I will kill you. So first of all was through religion, convert for your own good, or I will kill you. In the 18th or 19th century was through civilization, civilize for your own good, or I will kill you. In the 20th century was more economical, develop for your own good, or I will kill you. And in the last years was about democratization, democratize for your own good, or I will kill you. I'm sure you remember all the justification for the attacks against Iraq and the Middle East that has to do with the democratize. Even though these could look different, and in some regards are different, you will see that what starts is never left behind. It's just up to the other. So the religious, the historical, the economical, and the political, which is the ones I mentioned here, the convert, civilized, democratize, all the terms are going to be completely intertwined with each other. So the idea here is that the majority of the world has been inferiorized, and their condition of the recognition of humanity as something that Emma presents extremely well need to be done by the European path. And what is the problem? Europe was not the model because Europe was able to develop because they stole everything from everywhere else. So the only way for other people to develop is to also steal from other people. So this is where they are going to start cultivating elite in places that they're going to try to reproduce the idea of stealing as the only way of developing. So at the end of this process, the West presents itself as the culmination of evolution and a force that everyone should follow as a model. The closer one gets to this, the more favor is going to be. So as a Jew, Latin American, but today being in the US, I will say that this is a path that Jews will follow. While Jews in Europe were seen as complete other, when they came into the US, they were seeing, well, perhaps they can pass into whiteness. And there was a long process of making them like, but not quite. And as such, the closer one is to the ideal, which is European, is white, is male, is conquistador, the more the system is going to favor creating hierarchies among people that at different places, at different times, natives or people who are kidnapped in Africa will be seen at the bottom at different times, at different ways. Okay, and today in the US we see clearly with both natives and Africanos, people of Africana descent. Either they were coming as part of the kidnapping of people, or they were coming from other trajectories as well. That today we have a long Africana community in the US coming from different places. So as such, if one accepts that the only way is the European, one is going to be favored, but not completely, and giving a space between the hierarchy, and it's going to be both oppressor and oppressed at the same time. If someone opposed to this, it will be seen as an irrational collective, because who wouldn't want to develop? Who wouldn't want to be safe? Who wouldn't want to civilize? Who wouldn't want to be democratic? So those who oppose to this are going to be seen as irrational collectives who only want to regress history, and what is going to happen with them? They are going to be annihilated. They are going to be killed. So why religion is so important? Since the 16th, 17th century, religion was one of the first structures that allow for a racialization and hierarchization of people. And they did it in three major hierarchies. The first one were the people with a true religion, then through civilization, through democracy, or through democratic economical system, whose violence is justified as redemptive by the express of the development of civilization. So the pioneers, well, yeah, they killed some natives, but you know what? They did that to develop the place. Yes, it's true that they kidnapped some people from Africa, but look at how beautiful houses we built. Okay, so there, or yes, they need to be killed, but look, need to be killed Palestinians or Vietnamese, but look at them, they were trying to actually upset all the world and they are terrorists. So the violence is justified because a higher goal of civilization or salvation or capitalism or democracy is being presented. The second level is the collectives that they call as having no religion or no civilization, no economic system, no democracy. I want to clarify this. These people did have religion, did have civilization, did have economic system, did have democracy, but this has been negated. And those people were seen as childish, as wild, which violence is product of their lack, the lack of soul, the lack of history, the lack of development, the lack of education, and they should work as a system, and therefore will be collateral damage. Just think for a moment about especially African slavery, a collateral damage in the process of development. Traditionally, these people are going to be, traditionally this model will be applied to natives, to Africans, and ultimately also to some South Asians. The third one is going to be collectives with what they call the false religion, or being stuck on religion, whose violence is condemned for the challenge to the development of express or Christian civilization. These are mostly going to be qualified as the Oriental people who oppose development and got stuck in time, traditionally Muslims and Jews, and also other people in South Asia and Central Asia as well. But this is very important for someone like me, who is coming from a background where my ancestors were victims of genocide in multiple places by Europe, in Latin America, and in the Holocaust in Europe, because this is where I will place most of my ancestors. Not all of them, but most of my ancestors. So today I want to focus especially in this second structure, because this is where Enrique Dussel spent most of his time. And I want to explain how and why religion is so important. So I want to bring you to a very, very, very early debate, 50-50-50-51. Okay, this debate that took place in Spain when they encounter natives, and they summon a number of theologians and philosophers to explain the nature of the natives. And the questions of the natives was, can we integrate natives into the system? How do we justify this possession? And I'm going to explain how there are two different responses. And the two different responses look very different, but they are not actually very different. One of them is going to be a doctrine of what I call just war or biological racism. And the second is what I want to call a doctrine of just love and cultural racism. So let me start with this. The first person I want to introduce you who tried to answer this question is called Ginés de Sepúlveda. And he inaugurated a long-standing Western foreign policy, which the US has used quite often, okay, on just war or biological racism. He defined the natives as a perverse humanoid population, not fully human. They can only serve as servant of Europeans. They live a complete meaningless life because they lack religion, they lack politics, they lack economics. So it is fair to declare a just war to them, redeem the land for Christendom, and extirpate the resources. And as such, the redemption of the land through native subjugation, servant labor, is going to be an apology of elimination. It's not because they hate natives. I'm sure some of them hated natives, okay? But they will be presented discursively as just a collateral damage in the expansion of Christendom. Make sense? So it's not going to be that we hate natives, we want to kill them, even though many of them did, okay? And many of them probably did as well, but the rhetoric, the discourse about this is, we came to the land to develop it. If you oppose to it, sorry, we're going to eliminate you. And if you work with us, for us, and you die because of a forced labor, bad luck, you are just collateral damage. The second possibility is going to be Bartolomé de las Casas. And this is why this guy is very important, because this guy is presented as the person who is the forerunner of liberation theology. And he has done extremely good things, don't get me wrong, okay? There are some things of him that are interesting. He's going to write a complete apologetics defending for natives' lives, defending for natives, native possibility of living and being part of Christendom. So far, so good. But he's going to start developing what is called the doctrine of just love, cultural racism, or what we'll call liberal racism. He's going to explain that natives are peaceful humans. Great, he recognized them as human, fair enough, okay, so let's grant him that, who will not present resistance to Christendom. He invited them to bring them peacefully to Christianity and say them by bringing them the right development and integrate them into the Spanish conquer community. Is going to insist on what is called the white man burden, or the responsibility of Western Christians to bring them to salvation while culturally annihilating the religion, economical, and politics. So he's in favor for them to live. Don't get me wrong, it's good. He's in favor of bringing them with love and not kill them. Don't get me wrong, it's very good. But at the same time, Christianity or Christendom becomes the only possibility for the natives to live. Both Bartolomé de las Casas and Sepúlveda, even though they are very different, believe me, I read okay, there are interesting things here. Sepúlveda is just a racist. But both of them agree that the only possibility for natives to live in a modern world is going to be by following Christendom, by becoming Christians and by being, subjugated into Christendom. So on the one hand, we have, he didn't have the same question of Africans. At some point he said, okay, in order to alleviate the burden on natives, let's bring African slaves. He regretted afterwards, but we need to understand that actually he didn't have the question of Africans. But what I want to explain here is that the doctrine of just word or biological racism and the doctrine of just love or cultural racism are different, but at the same time are integral part of the same project of Christendom of dominating the world and presenting Christendom as the only possibility. And I am going to finish with this slide, okay? So from this is a little bit of the conclusion. From the very early time, the church was involved in the construction of inferiority, and just to follow a little bit what Emma said very well before, inhumanity of others and forceful conversion to the only path. First was religious salvation, later on was historical civilization, ultimately was economical development or political democracy. It doesn't matter if we have a theology of just war with Sepúlveda or theology of just love with Las Casas. All of them justify the supremacy of the white European man over others. And yes, I want to repeat, yes, they are different, okay? It's not the same to have one or the other, but at the same time, they contribute to the same project. So colonialism, which is the subjugation of one population over another, become a global project of coloniality. What is coloniality, according to people who accompany Enrique Dussel, are the patterns of racist domination that emerged during colonial times, but excel the colonial times to be alive today, even beyond the colonies themselves. Because still in Europe, you are as racist or even more racist than in the rest of the world. So the objective that I want to leave before we hopefully start a good conversation with each other is, I want to invite you to think for a moment where the system has placed each one of us. Between the US, between the regionally, I would say nationally, regionally, internationally, and what we can do from our positionalities, both individual, but also as the collective you are from the excellent organization you have in Briarwood that Robert Smith lead you to disentangle racist coloniality. Understanding that the just war and the just love or biological racism and cultural racism might sound different, and they have some differences, but ultimately they contribute the same project, which is there is only one way of being. And that way of being is to imitate the European or now the Euro-American Christian man. So thank you so much for your patience, and I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much for this, Professor Slavadsky. I wonder if I might offer a couple of comments as we move into a broader conversation. I think that people will recognize that this conversation, this session in this series is very different than the sessions that have come before. We have been focusing solely on the United States, and then focusing almost solely within that on black-white questions of racism and white supremacy, right? So this conversation has taken us geographically far. It's taken us through history in a different way over the past 500 years and beyond. And it has opened up this conversation about Latin America, which is different than what we've done in previous sessions. One of the things that I'm not sure all Americans are fully conscious of is that when we talk about the modern or modernity as an historical reality, many Americans aren't clear that how the United States fits into that. And I always focus on that Latin phrase, the novus ordo seclorum, that the United States is the new order of the age. That the United States is the pinnacle of the modern. Modernity is the colonial reality that you're describing since 1492, and the United States contains within itself all of that history of domination and racism and hierarchies of human existence. And so I wonder, Santiago, as somebody who's been in the United States for decades, I've been in North America for decades, you taught in Canada before teaching in the United States. How do you think of this North American reality in relation to that trajectory of history?
Yeah, let me just 1 second, because there is something I didn't mention in order to answer your, okay, I don't know if you have seen give me just 1 second, if you don't mind. I can share this again for 1 second. It's just to answer well the excellent question that Robert asked. If you see the very last slide I have, so you are going to have 3 images there. The first one is from Black Lives Matter uprising. Let's just call it as it is, the uprising. The second one is a concentration camp in the border, with largely people who have some native ascendants. Not all of them, but many of them. Many of us who are Latin Americans who can come legally here, we are mixed descendant or sometimes descendant from Europe, but a lot of the people who finish in these camps are descendants of not only, but also natives or Africans. And the last one is about Islamophobia. And why I wanted to share these 3 images with you. I want to share these 3 images with you because I believe that what started in 1492, it took different paths in different places. And in the US, it is clearly that it became in many ways, it has been discussed in terms of a black-white divide. The problem is, first of all, there are 2 possibilities of interpreting this. The first possibility is, okay, the black-white divide was real, now we are into something else because the population is much more diverse. I would say there has always been diverse. When we talk about the black-white divide, the question is where the natives are placed there. At the same time, we do need to understand that a lot of structures in the US were presented as a black-white divide, and that obscure other kind of racializations. So the question here is how we can learn from this history in order to illuminate the black-white divide and all the other racializations at the same time, to create some kind of coalitions of people who have suffered different aspects of the system I am explaining, but at the same time interrelated aspects. So Yes, as Robert has heard me many times speaking, the black-white divide explains a lot of things in the US, but not everything. It doesn't explain everything everywhere else in the world. So we need to pay attention to this. And I believe that the introduction into 1492 is an introduction that is very important. Why? Because when we start in 1619, for example, we need to understand that there were almost 250 years of construction of the inhabitants of Africa as natural slaves before that happened. And as such, the US, the south of the US, looked much more like the Caribbean than the rest of the US, because it was integrated into an economical system that was based on of kidnapping of people in Africa and enslaving them. So what we look at it even more backwards. We understand that this black-white divide, white superior, black inferior, is not a given. Has been historically constructed for a particular reason. And starting at a later date, somehow obscure that early construction. So for example, you are going to see that in the 17th century, even the 17th, I would say in the 15th century, 14th century, mostly 14th to 15th century, you are going to have a lot of merchants, Christians in Europe, trying to get the business of the East African kingdoms that today we consider blacks in the trip to Mecca. So, okay, wait a second. So why the Christians are trying to get the business of Africans who are black, well, today we consider them black. By then they were, different people from different into Mecca. It's because Europe was a peripheral place. The wealth was in Africa. The wealth was in the Middle East, or in this merchant paths. And as such, Christians were looking at the Middle East and Africa, and many parts of Africa, not everywhere in Africa, but many parts of Africa, as the wealthy place where they want to make business. So when we look at history from that moment of the 14th century, before the Portuguese explorers start to kidnap people in the west coast of Africa, we start to think for a moment that actually the construction of black-white and the hierarchy is not natural. It's not innate. It's not a given. The same thing we can say of, for example, that for most of what we call the medieval times, the highest philosophy was developed mostly by Muslims. They are the ones interpreting Greek philosophy. But what happened in modernity, Western Christianity took over, and in a different article, Dussel will say, kidnap Greek philosophy or Greek political models as a Western invention. And this Western invention is going to completely erase the hundreds and hundreds of years that Muslims had developed these philosophies and these political theories. Even Aquinas, one of the major thinkers, late medieval, early modern Christian thinkers, recognized the Muslims as the one who have done this. In the same way, we can talk about natives. We do know there were great civilizations in the Americas. And what is the first thing that was done by the conquistador? They burned what we call the libraries. They did with the Muslim wars, they did in the Americas, different kind of libraries, but still libraries, because they erase the memory that can help us to understand that Europe was not the center of knowledge. So when we start before the US, okay, we start in this 14th, 15th century, we started to think that Europe was a peripheral power fighting with others, with some good elements, some bad elements. And the global conquest helped to erase all that in such a way that today we think that we need to, from the US, people need, on the Europe, people need to help Africa or Latin America or Asia to develop, when actually the first step was to underdevelop them in order to develop later. But this is also can be explained, sorry for a long explanation, but can be explained by, the fact that a lot of people who were kidnapped in Africa, because they were coast people, they knew how to develop plantations. They have irrigation knowledges. But all our conception of slaves are the ones who are thrown into the fields, are raped, are mistreated, but a lot of those people who were kidnapped are today what we will consider professionals. Okay, but these people were kidnapped and stole from Africa that could develop them and brought to the Caribbean, Latin America, and later on to the US. So I want to start thinking that what we know today as history is a European construction erasing the multiple contributions different people have done throughout history. That doesn't mean Europeans have a major contribution. Don't get it wrong. Yes, they have done some contributions, and there is no reason to deny them, but they are one among many others. So this engaging from this will be to go back to history a little bit, to a moment in which different people were contributing, not because I want to return to a romantic past, but because we need to think that the idea that only one people have the whole knowledge of the world is very recent, no more than 400-500 years ago, and is the exception in the history of humanity. The norm in the history of humanity is to have different centers doing different things, interlocking with each other, not to have one power that illuminates the rest of the world. And I don't want to return to what Africa was then. Come on, we are advanced, but I want to return to what is called a polycentric, multiple centric center, a polycentric world where, as the Zapatistas movement says in Mexico, a world where many worlds can fit. Okay, this is why I want to go back a little bit in history and look at that moment in which the world had many centers and not only one. Did I answer a little bit, Robert?
Sure. No, no, you did. That's wonderful, and I think situating what the current shape of the world is nowhere. It has nothing definitive to say about history, right? That we need to be careful as we look back through history, and I think this the clarification that you offer too, that the slaves that the people who were kidnapped and brought as slaves were the professionals, the one who carried engineering knowledge, the one who carried specialist knowledge. First of all, I want to note that in the chat, Johnny asked the question: were you speaking about North Africans when you were talking about the Mecca trade, or is that what's called the Barbary Coast? Or were you talking about the more East African communities?
What's called mostly was the King of Mali, but there are different Kingdom of Mali. No, it's not North Africa. It's mostly what we would today we consider kingdoms of Africa.
Okay.
Of what we consider Sub-Saharan Africa, not Africans. Actually, the conception of North Africa was very, I would say, very diffuse, because remember that until the 16th century, Muslims had a major area of Africa in the Iberian Peninsula and later on in the south of Italy. And ultimately, they were until much longer in the south of the southeast, which is the Balkans. So the conception of North Africa is also a construction. Let's not forget that, for example, some fathers of the church, such as what you call Saint Augustine, was born in what today is Algeria. Okay, so the idea of what is Africa and what is Europe was not developed there. Make sense?
Yes. I saw that Joy had raised a hand. Is that right?
Joy got kicked off, so we're waiting for her to log back on.
Oh, coming back in. Did you accidentally do something?
No, she dropped off.
Joy, are you back with us? And do you have a question for Santiago?
Not back yet. It's still connecting.
Okay. Well, I note that Emma said in the chat that Songhai, Timbuktu, and Mali were all great empires. at that time.
Yeah, and I want to clarify, you know, that doesn't mean I am endorsing their empires. All empires have problems, okay? Many empires have slavery, many empires have oppression. I am not saying that people were clean until Europe came, okay? I'm just saying that for the first time in human history, we have one global power that took over the whole world and instaurated something that has been inexistent or very rare until then, which was chattel slavery, which means the people who are born to slaves are also going to be slaves ad infinitum. Okay, so that is an important factor. The problem of Europe is not that Europe oppress. Yeah, many empires oppress. It is Europe become a global power as presenting itself as the only possibility.
Right. Joy Wallace, I don't know if you can speak at this point. Okay, I guess not. Well, friends, I wondered, does anybody else want to engage Santiago with a question before we talk specifically about the text that we read for this evening? I'm sure that, like me, you are impressed with the sweep of global history that you've been presented with this evening. And I think the one of the centerpieces that I take away from a conversation like this is the question of church responsibility. The actions that have been undertaken with the banner of the church flying overhead. And because all of this was done with absolute Western Christian blessing. None of this was challenged by the church authorities of that time or this time. And now there's a movement among many Western Christians to feel very, very bad about these things that were done in the name of the church, but really not to work too hard to dismantle the outcomes of those structures. Not to challenge the outcomes of those structures. And so we can become aware and have somewhat negative feelings about our predecessors in the faith, but we don't really do too much to take responsibility for the historical benefits that we have accrued through that history. And every one of us, I would say, who is part of a Western Christian tradition, Lutherans included, even if we are people of color, even if we are queer, even if we inhabit other intersectional oppressions, we are part of that history and we are called to account, called to responsibility in relation to that. And that's a difficult message for many people to receive. And you heard tonight Santiago talking about his own family history of genocide and suffering. And that is, something that Santiago mentions, didn't dwell on it very much in the presentation, but the histories of Christian oppression that Santiago himself carries within his own body, within his own identity, and to be in this space with us is a risk for somebody like that, right? And so I think we are called to honor and respect and to be called to account for those histories. Jackie Oswald, I see a hand up there. If you want to unmute yourself, Jackie. You're still muted, Jackie Oswald, and I can't unmute you. And then I also see hands from Madeline Richard and Porter.
Yeah, I said, I know a lot of you are more familiar with this. I've heard the phrases, but I do not really know what they mean. Liberation theology or liberation philosophy.
So liberation theology and liberation philosophy are two ways of interpreting the world that emerged in the 90s, mostly in the late 1960s, early 1970s, as Emma explained first and Robert later. So liberation theology is originally a way for Latin American priests, largely, to interpret the lessons of the Second Vatican Council about engaging their pastoral work in the land with people. These are very revolutionary times in Latin America. A lot of people were actually trying to create uprising against dictatorships, uprising against poverty, and these are people in the church who decide that they want to stand in the line of the people. So they formulated a theology that takes what they call a preferential option for those who are oppressed, saying, God, if God loves everyone, at the end, he, she, or them don't love anyone. So God has a particular connection with the poor, and these are the people who are going to defend. Now, there are different people of liberation theology. Some of them more academic, some of them are more practical, most of them connected one thing and the other. Some of them supported a very, very strong fight for the poor, but not armed struggle. Some of them did support armed struggle. So there is a lot of diversity here, okay? But these are people who are committed to the social struggle against poverty, the social struggle against dictatorships, the social struggle against oppressions. First of all, in Latin America, that was the most common one, but later on, I would say, at the same time as Latin America, it also emerged a liberation theology here in the US, but mostly Afro-American liberation theology. That was called Black liberation theology, of the person that Emma mentioned before, James Cone, is the best known figure, but not the only one, who started to understand that the central role of God was to support the oppressed in the US, and he interpreted the oppressed in the US as the Afro-American people. So we'll develop a theology from that positionality of oppression, and it's going to join many others who are fighting for racial justice. And later on, this liberation theology was, I would say, it has very influential throughout the world. Like in Korea, you are going to have what is called Minjung liberation theology, or theology of the people, who is going to be against the dictatorship. And in Palestine, you are going to have a very, very strong liberation theology. It's going to be a liberation theology against the settler colonialism of the Zionist project. And in Africa, you're going to have a lot of elements there as well. So liberation theology became, for the last 20, 30 years, a space to relate a very strong theological framework with social commitment and fighting for the oppressed. And liberation philosophy, liberation philosophy is the school that Enrique Dussel, who was not a priest, okay, started thinking about these terms, but outside the realm of theology, in the realm of philosophy, but all the time in conversation with theology.
Thank you for that, Santiago.
Wonderful.
Yeah,
thank you so much, Jackie.
I see hands from Todd and Madeline.
Okay, I was just going to ask, knowing, I mean, this is, I guess, for me, a lot of this is like, I've known about all this since the 70s when I first started studying all of this, well, myself. But my question has always been, why do you think, or why do we continue the behavior, knowing that that there's the truth, the truth's out there, the truths are out there, why do we continue the behavior?
Yeah, thank you so much, Madeline, for the question. First of all, I will not argue that what I presented today is new, okay? It's not new. Are pieces that I took from Dussel and the students of Dussel. I consider myself students of the students of Dussel, so makes sense. So when I present my work, perhaps I push it a bit more in certain aspects, but here you are completely right, okay? You shouldn't be surprised for what I said, okay? I'm great, you're not surprised, but I think your question is very important. And I just think that if we interpret racism, and that happens a lot to me when I teach this in the context of university. Let me tell you why. Because I have mostly diverse classrooms, and the conception of the kids going to college is the difference between us and other people is we go to college, so education can solve everything. So why? Is because if racism is ignorance, education can solve it. I will just emphasize that racism has a lot of ignorance, no question about that, okay? But it's not just ignorance. Someone is getting something out of that. someone is benefiting from it. So education, even though it's very important, don't get it wrong, like I am an educator, I teach, there's no problem about this. Education has a limit. The limit is that species like racism are structural, and the problem is not ignorance. Ignorance is one problem, but the problem is not ignorance. The point is that people don't like to abandon the given privilege or the given supremacy. And that includes someone like me. I am light-skinned. Yes, I come from a Jewish background, mixed Jewish background, European, North African, and I am socially committed for a long time. But at the same time, I have Palestine. I come to the US, and for example, in the Trump era, I carry my green card. I'm not a citizen. I only have a green card. I carry my green card with me, afraid that when I commute to school 2 hours back and forth, I was going to stop. This is the situation. As far as I don't open my mouth, nobody will ask me anything. If I open my mouth, I don't know if you realize I don't have an accent, so it will happen, okay? But I don't. Why? It's because I have European background that put me aside from other Latinos, Latinas, and Latines who don't have that background, and as such, I am not going to be personally attacked. So I myself, coming from a Jewish background, coming from Latin America, I also need to acknowledge certain level of priority. I have a job because with an endowed chair because someone came and put money to hire someone in Jewish studies. That doesn't happen in all fields, okay? And I am very thankful, believe me, I'm very thankful that person put the money, that the school wants to hire me, that I can teach these things, so it's great. But at the same time, there are levels of privilege that we need to come into account. And it's not easy to give up our privilege. It's not easy to give us the structure of supremacy that help us to have food in our tables, to help us to have a job, to think that we have a 401k when we retire, okay? Or we are not going to be killed for, okay, I don't know how to drive, I live in New York, but still, when I drive, I am not going to be killed if the police stops me, okay? So, or I am not going to be at 3 a.m. if I go for a walk, because I do, okay? I am not going, it's less likely I'm going to be raped than if I was a woman. It could happen, but you know what? So there are multiple aspects that, it's not easy to give up. So it requires much more than just work against ignorance to do this, and it's because some people having the privilege or the supremacy to do this. So the question is whether or not they are ready to give it up. I don't think they are. And this is why we continue.
Basically, what you're saying is get honest, because I appreciate your honesty and your authenticity in owning your privilege and your supremacy. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. Or at least, this is why I ask the question. Thank you so much, Madeline, for that. Is where the system places you. Okay, we are still speaking English. Those who speak English in this world are going to have still, even if you are a racialized community, some privilege over other people who don't, okay? That doesn't mean that you are an oppressor. It means that the system has placed you in a particular place that you are going to have some privilege and some unprivileges. Some people are really high, some people are extremely low, but it's about creating hierarchies of humanity. And this is what we need to confront. The hierarchies of humanity. So, sorry, short answer is people still repeat this because there are people who are profiting from it. And that is as simple as, I can go simpler than that. Thank you so much, Madeline.
Thank you. I see other hands have come up, but I just want to point out that most of all of our previous sessions, we've actually gone into small breakout rooms and that sort of thing to discuss the text. This is maybe turning into something different. We only have 36 people logged in, so this is a breakout room. Let's, this is okay. But I do also, I see that Todd, Alicia, and Elaine have hands up, and I wonder if we can also, remember we did read a text for tonight. Santiago brought a lot of other content as well. But I guess since I have a little bit of privilege here as a moderator of the conversation, I'd like to draw everybody's attention to the text in page 73. as we move through this. This is where Dussel is directly critiquing Hegel. And this is where Dussel is that liberation philosopher, not a liberation theologian. Although philosophy, especially in its continental forms, in the pre-critical period, so when you're going from Kant to Hegel, is explicitly Christian, is in fact Lutheran philosophy from Kant and Hegel, who were both Lutheran intellectuals. And when what Hegel says, against the absolute right that such a people possesses by virtue of being the bearer of the development of the world's spirit, the spirit of other peoples has no rights. We, the white men of Europe, bear the spirit of the world, and against that other people have no rights. What Dussel says is this is one of the clearest definitions not only of Eurocentrism, but of the sacralization of the imperial power of the North, or the center over the South, the periphery, the colonial and dependent world of antiquity. Further commentary is unnecessary. This text, the texts speak in their frightening cruelty of a limitless cynicism that masks itself as the development of reason itself. No further commentary is necessary. And so just keep in mind that when we're talking about Christianity here too, we're talking about the very thought structures of European reason, what Kant understood to be pure reason. And how do we critique that pure reason on whatever side of that reason we encounter it? And so, Santiago, I wonder if you have anything else to add on a point like that.
No, I think you explained it very, very well. I just think that in my explanation, I went a little bit earlier to see a little bit the origin of this, but I just think that what Dussel does very well is to explain the ultimate formulation of it. And this is what Hegel is. Hegel is the ultimate formulation of this long-standing construction of the European man that actually can explain much for this. So thank you so much, Robert. This is very good. That's very helpful.
Okay, so I see Alicia. Would you like to interject?
Yes, I was going to speak something of liberation theology, but it ties in, this ties in also liberation theology with where he ends at the end. And I heard the same thing from Santiago. That is, it's on the last page, 76. It's what we call interdependence. And it seems he is, Dussel is saying the goal is incorporative solidarity, solidaridad, between center peripheral, man and woman, and different races. So that is where he ends, and that's what I heard in Santiago. And I relate that to liberation theology. As just a low-level pastor with my people, my praxis and my preaching assumes that, well, Jesus is treating everyone equally, but the needier are the poor, and they are more responsive. And so the liberation theology comes from what Jesus did. So I preach from that point of view. And how to practice this is the question all of us have. Madeline articulated it. Because we're part of the system and we have privilege, seen or unconscious, it is a struggle. And that's the area I would like further development from Briarwood. So that's all I wanted to say.
Alicia, if you don't mind, I add something. Thank you so much for that. I think you are completely right. And I would like to return to one idea here, which is when Madeleine, spoke that, I knew this from the 70s, there is something in our current system that makes us believe that the new is the best. Okay, just I don't want to go to the iPhones, but you know what? That is, the iPhone is the ultimate. The Hegel for Dussel is the iPhone for us in that sense. Okay, the last. You know, as soon as you get the last one, there is a new one coming. Okay, and you need to throw away the other one because it doesn't work anymore. And there is something that happened in the past that was completely cut off through the war on terror in the last years, but later on the war against the last years of in the Cold War and neoliberalism. That this space of solidarity constructed out of relations of the press that really developed in the 70s. Is something that now people can see as outdated because X or Y say, yes, there is some issues that I need to attend more to gender, perhaps there is some issues of race and I need to look at that. Yes, there are issues, don't get it wrong, okay? But at the same time, there was some kind of what I call hope to have hope in the past. Because there is certain kind of struggles that they might have failed, don't get it wrong, they might have failed. Alicia brought back liberation theology, and perhaps liberation theology has failed to some extent, but the failure can give us the idea that we can recover that for another future. So I want to invite to be inspired by the past, because the past is a very modern conception. Well, the past is out and forgotten. No, the past is still with us. Colonialism, transforming coloniality is still with us. The struggle of liberation theologians is still with us. So the question is how we can reinterpret a little bit of that past that Madeleine was talking in the 70s, that Alicia was talking about the liberation theology of the 70s, and bring it into the 21st century with the same kind of impetus and working out the problems they have, because everyone has problems, is because the past is still with us. So thank you so much, Alicia, for that connection and connecting with Madeleine that talk about that this is not necessarily new.
All right, I see Elaine's hand. And you're muted.
Yeah.
Until this discussion, I have never heard anything positive about liberation theology. Everything I've ever heard about it has been negative, that it's Marxist, heresy, and I have never heard anything positive about liberation theology.
Okay, Elaine, thank you so much for that comment. Sorry, you are for finishing.
No, it's what he's telling me.
No, thank you so much, Elaine, for that comment. So Robert introduced me, and he has known me for a long time. This is as a Marxist Jew. You know, I have been trained in Marxism, but I have been trained in many things. Today, I will not necessarily be a Marxist, okay? But I incorporate what liberation has done, which is what they call a Marxist analysis. I would say analysis of the social structure of oppression for a different goal. And the different goal is not going to be only Christian, because they join many others who are fighting. Some people Marxists, some people who are nationalists, some people who are different things, into a different goal, which was to help in the process of liberation of the press. But the question is why liberation theology has been so misquoted and so misunderstood in the US. And I invite you to think a little bit about this. Okay, this has been a particular theory emerging from the South, and from Dussel is very clear, the only people who can think are people from the North. So what happened that these people from the South come with the theory? And not only people from the South, but also Afro-Americans in the US. So, but these people are inferior than us. How they can come with one of the most cutting edge thing, and that cutting edge things put in questions all what we have thinking about this. So how these people who should be inferior, geographically, racially, gender, because there is a lot of liberation theologians like womanism, mujerista, from Afro-Americans and Latinas, they are also really, really engaged with gender and sexuality, different ones, but very well. How they do that is because the presupposition is that only the European white man can think, and the rest should follow. Don't get me wrong, a lot of what we call what European man can think, and they think very well, okay? Don't get me wrong, okay? Some of them are very smart, and I learned a lot from a lot of them, okay? But at the same time, are not the only ones who can think. So liberation theology became so attacked, first of all, because it shifted what is called Lewis Gordon called the geography of reason. It changed the geography of reason. Just think about all the passages that Robert was quoting of Hegel about who can think, who cannot think. It was changing the geography of reason to see who can think and who cannot think. Second, was saying those who think you have too much because you stole from us. Not only that, but also that is unchristian. Imagine if you tell that to someone who have heard about the prosperity gospel, where the logic is, if I am rich, it's because God can bless me. And these people are saying, no, actually, the sin is not individual, the sin is social, and you are committing a social sin. It's completely upside down. It's the counter of the prosperity gospel. But remember, the prosperity gospel was extremely important. I would say prosperity gospel and all trends that follow in the times of neoliberalism and individualism in the US. So, and I repeat with this, the liberation theology was dangerous because of the content, no question of this, but also because who was thinking about it. Because the presupposition is only the white European man can think. And I repeat, a lot of white European men can think, and they think great things, and actually it's very helpful for them, but also many other people can think as well. And the liberation theology was confronted that. This is why many people in the US, some of you did, okay, but many people in the US have only seen critiques of liberation theology.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Joy, are you with us? You're muted and your camera's off, so. You want to speak, Joy?
We can pass to
It
Todd,
looks like she's trying to connect in the end panel.
Okay.
I think Todd had a question, and then no, or I'm wrong.
Donna?
Yeah. Or
Okay.
Todd already asked a question. Sorry.
Yeah, if anybody else can jump in right now. We're a small enough group. We can do this.
I think Joy might be trying to come on another way.
Okay.
All right. Donna, you just raised your hand.
Yes. So I'll bring something up, and that is on page 75 in the article. Dussel sets out. He summarizes 7 elements of the myth of modernity, and I found this to be such a helpful summary. But the one that really blew my mind was number 4, where the barbarian or the primitive opposes the civilizing process put on by Europeans or Americans or whoever is in power. The praxis of modernity must have recourse to the violence necessary to remove the obstacles to modernization. And I can think of so many examples of this in the wars that the United States fought on behalf of the United Fruit Company, which was basically an excuse to get cheap bananas out of Central America, and so many other examples. But I thought this was just such a wonderful summary and really got me thinking.
Thank you so much, Donna. I just think that you made an excellent point. You know, that summary is very good. I tried to spread the summary in different slides, no, to go deeper into this. But I just think this conception that if someone is irrational, you need to stop it, because there is only one path. And as such, that justifies this, but also can justify Vietnam, can justify Iraq, can justify even sometimes of the fights against China now. So I just think that is very important, but also it justify, for example, emphasizing calling Black Lives Matter riots. Because the interpretation is these are barbarians who don't want to achieve modernity and they just want to destroy stuff. So this is about redemptive violence. We can use the violence to stop them from doing that. Or we interpret that all the Latinos who are coming are part of gangs. Or that Muslims have interpreted the caravan of refugees that are coming in order to implode in the US. Okay, so this is all conceptions of exactly those who oppose. We have the right to eliminate them. And I just think that this is something we see, I would just say daily in our society and throughout the world. So thank you so much, Donna, for pointing that out so well.
I'd like to give a little shout out to David Boland for putting quotes in the chat, just in case people don't have access to the PDF. Thank you for that accessibility that you're providing, Dave. That's very appreciated.
Yes.
And then Todd just said, just offered appreciation for Gustavo Gutierrez. And Santiago, I wonder if you could just tell us any stories you might want to share about your encounters with Father Gustavo.
I just think, Robert, you can do it as well. So I encountered Gustavo Gutierrez a few times, but one of them was with Robert, not that far away from you, in Waco, Texas, where he came to give a lecture and spend a few days with us. And we were both, Robert and myself, working with Jewish liberation theology Mark Ellis, that Robert mentioned before. Do you want to talk about a particular story?
Go ahead. You do.
No, go for it. Go for it.
So Santiago and I were the student workers, right? And so we were the ones charged.
I have heard them, so it was a long time ago. Yes, sorry.
And so Santiago and I were the student workers, and we were charged with taking Father Gutierrez around. And I happened to be driving a 4x4 Ford F-150 that I had inherited from my father.
Huge.
And Father Gustavo's from Peru. And he's very, very short. And so we had to have a 2-tiered step stool for Father Gustavo to climb up into that pickup. But we took him all around Central Texas in a Ford F-150, and he loved it. And so we had wonderful times together. And of course, we had some other experiences during that retreat that were equally fun. But Father Gustavo was such a joy to be with. But we got invited into many aspects of his personal reality that were so surprising. And then later on, Santiago one time got a phone call, right? And how did he introduce
So
you?
what happened was that one of my tasks during that time was to ask and convince Father Gutierrez to write a foreword for the book forthcoming of Mark Ellis. So I did my thing, I worked it out, and so he sent it to me, I translated, and I sent it, okay? And I spent a month without knowing about this. At some point, I remember I was reading a book with some kind of fresh drink in a very hot afternoon in Texas, in Waco, Texas, okay? And I received a phone call, okay? I was never receiving phone calls because people didn't know me around there. And so I get the phone and I answer the phone, and someone saying, Santiago, yes, who is this? Gustavo. And I have the audacity of asking, Gustavo who? So I was asking Gustavo Gutierrez, but you will never imagine that the most giant of 20th century liberation theologians is just going to call you in the phone. So believe me, was not something that you will expect. So I have a beautiful conversation with him, and my first means we are not very logical, because I was still confused at how this giant will actually call me in the phone. But Gustavo, and probably Robert can agree with me, Gustavo was, he was short, a short person, but he was a giant. And he was a giant not only for his writings, his work in the ground and his commitments, but also because he was the most humble and honest human being that you can imagine. And I remember he was one of the first people that I met, and I realized that if you really want to make a difference in the world, you need to be a giant in humility, because only the humble people get to influence others like that. I am not as humble as him. I, of course, will never become what he was, but at least I learned that from him. So thank you so much, Todd, for your comment.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Oh, Madeline, I want to hand it over to Emma so we can close out too.
Actually, I was going to quickly talk about this last sentence of the reading, the very last sentence. For this to happen, however, the negated and victimized other face of modernity, the colonial periphery, the Indian, the slave, the woman, the child, the subalternized popular cultures must, in the first place, discover itself as innocent, as the innocent victim of a ritual sacrifice who, in the process of discovering itself as innocent, may now judge modernity as guilty of an originary, constitutive, and irrational violence. When I read that, which I agreed with, it also put on me that I am the innocent victim, and I have to accept this. And I mean, and some of you guys have seen some of my writing. I talk about the conditioning and indoctrination of Western European thinking and culture and the colonizer. But my thing is, as I continue to ask, if we know the truth, if we know that what we're doing is wrong, if we go about thinking that we're teaching some poor innocent somebody something instead of opening our minds and accepting where they are. You know, I was in South Africa, like I said, last year, and I loved hearing the history about how the Portuguese went there, and then the Dutch came because they were looking for more. And eventually the British took over, you know. But in order for even the beginnings of Europeans to get there, they forced the people to believe that their tribal leaders were criminals, you know, with this indoctrination. So my thing is, instead of, why don't we just meet one another where we are, you know, halfway, so to speak, so I can learn more about you and you learn more about me, and we may be able to come to a place of understanding rather than you forcing yours on me, because yours is right and yours is popular and yours is, you feel, well, through violence better.
It's the question of power. And that's something that we in our contemporary church life are not all that comfortable discussing. The manifestations of power and the violence that can be a manifestation of power. Violence that our churches have enacted in the past and that we pretend to reject today. And the question of how we then organize the power necessary to challenge the structures by which we are dominated and we dominate others. Those are the pieces that we are challenged with now. I see Anne has jumped up with a hand right at the last minute, and and I'm wondering, oh, and actually let me just point out here, Joy in the chat has said that she's wanting to just get in the point, prior to the invention of whiteness, Irish, Italian, German, etc., people, the fallacy of history is that history is written by those in power, which means it's biased toward their perception of beliefs. Although I too was aware of many of these ideas previously, they were presented by different titles. I believe that dropping the white label will go a long way toward moving toward respecting the histories of many peoples. So refusing those categories of being and looking at specificities of communal experience will be important. So that's the point that Joy was seeking to raise. And Anne, are you with us? Or did Anne drop out?
And
She is. She's there.
I didn't hear you calling me. I'm sorry.
All right, your hand was up.
I just
Anne.
wanted to reply in a way to Alicia. And
Hmm.
I know I took it down because I didn't think we had time.
You're good.
My experience of worshiping and studying with the base Christian communities in Central America, they first turned to the Bible. And maybe, and from there they found where they were situated in regard to power. And the power in many cases was the church itself. So, and of course, all the other power factors there. I don't know if that's the starting point for us, but that's something I think Father Gutierrez might understand.
Thank you so much for that, Anne. Well, I wonder, Emma, are you available to close us out this evening?
I am.
Thank you.
First, I want to thank Professor Santiago for introducing us to Enrique Dussel, because he provides the groundwork for the church to be in the forefront of resisting oppression. He explains how we must critique the structures of colonialism, imperialism, globalization, racism, and sexism from the experience of exploitation and alienation from a secondary position. So I have a couple of poems I'd like to share. And the first, I always go to Langston Hughes since my grandson was born on the 99th anniversary of Langston Hughes' birthday. So Langston Hughes was born on February 1, 1901 or 201. Okay. Oh, whatever. Okay, here we go. I look at the world. I look at the world from awakening eyes and a black face, and this is what I see. This fenced off narrow space assigned to me. I look then at the silly walls through the dark eyes in a dark face. And this is what I know, that all these walls, oppression bills, will have to go. I look at my own body with eyes no longer blind, and I see that my own hands can make the world that's in my mind. Then let us hurry up, comrades, the road to find. And then I want to use this other poem that I did, I think when we first started. And this is by a Bengali poet. And he won the Nobel laureate for literature. He was a Nobel laureate for literature in 1913. And his last name is Tagore. Where the mind is without fear and the head is held high, where knowledge is free, where the world had not been broken up into fragments by narrow domestic walls, where words come out from the depth of truth, where tireless striving stretches its arms toward perfection, where the clear stream of reason has not lost its way into the dreary desert sand of dead habit, where the mind is led forward by thee into ever widening thought and action, into the heaven of freedom. My Father, let my world awake. And he says country, but since we're talking about global, I said, let my world awake. And so again, I want to thank Professor Santiago for introducing us to Enrique Dussel, because he's given us a lot of food for thought. And, we have this study group, this White Supremacy and Racism study group is sponsored by the Briarwood Leadership Institute and Public Witness. This is an outgrowth of Public Witness. So I want to thank those of you who are on tonight, part of Public Witness team, for providing this platform for us to widen our horizons be introduced to other literature information so that we can be armed with the truth, and we will be able to share with others and have friendly discourse with others who disagree with us. Thank you again, Professor.
Thanks everyone for your time, and it was wonderful meeting you, and hopefully we can meet some other time in person, and we can break bread together.
Thank you.
Thank you, Santiago. Good night, everybody.
Night.